Greetings 94th, this is Beaker 1-2 with another emergency landing pattern video here for you. In this scenario we're going to be talking about the spiral ELP and how to do those procedures and basically perform a good glide back to the airfield if you have an engine failure. So we'll be going through the checklist for that, how to recognize an engine out condition both in and out of the cockpit, and then how to fly the pattern. Also the reason why. Hey Beaker, why would you want to fly a nice fancy little pattern around the airfield to bring your aircraft back home safely? Well, that's a good question. Mostly the spiral ELP is designed for you being kind of like farther out, miles and miles away from the airfield at a specified altitude. And what you're trying to do is figure out what altitude you're at, and then what altitude you need to approach the field, and where to approach the field so you can make the landing a success. And this can be from miles away, so you're kind of doing like a long-range plan on how you're going to bring the aircraft back safely. It can be practical in War Thunder. This is a little bit of an exaggerated demonstration of how this can be done in a real battle. But it is doable, and especially if you're farther away or even lower on altitude, doing a little bit of this can basically figure out, can you make it, can you not, and what's the best way to approach the field. In the scenario here, we're in an arcade battle. My buddy and I are going after a PBY in Tier 1 planes, going after this nice juicy target here. So let's get started here. So we're moving in. We want to go and riddle this PBY up. Now, I'm sure if many of you have engaged PBYs before, or other bombers, you can tell basically that if you get into a fight or engagement with these guys, they can knock out your engine. It's been done before. I'm kind of a glutton for punishment myself. This seems to happen to me a lot. So we put some hits into this guy. We're taking fire back and forth. I'm getting a little bit close. So I put a couple more shots in this guy and I peel off for another pass. But first, let's check inside the cockpit and see what's going on. Well, I got this oily, greasy crap all over my canopy. That's not good. That's usually signs of an engine malfunction. Looking at my RPMs and my manifold pressure here, well, they just freaked out here a bit. Looks like the RPMs are sitting about 500 per minute here, and my manifold pressure pretty much crapped out. Looks like I'm losing altitude at about 200 feet per minute, and I'm low on altitude, or sorry, airspeed. I probably can't command my throttle, so those are the signs of an engine failure right off the bat. So instead of doing my engine failure checklist procedures right away, I decided I want to go after this PBY's friend instead. So I do have a little bit of airspeed to go tangle with this guy. Kind of want to get some shots in as revenge for, well, having to leave the game so early on an engine failure. So I'm going to go after his injured buddy. So he dives. Perfect. That means I can use more of that altitude and trade it for airspeed and stay in the fight just a little bit longer. But now he's starting to climb, and I realize, well, I don't have an engine to do that with. So I put a couple more shots into him, and I decide I'm going to peace out. Alright, well, let's get to that checklist then. So the engine out failure checklist procedures, well, let's see what's going on. First is glide establish, and my prop just stopped spinning, so glide establish. Looking at my airspeed here for the Wildcat, I found it best to have about 135, 140 mile an hour airspeed. So that's about what I'm setting right about now, and these 0 RPMs pretty much correlate with the fact that the prop stopped spinning. Alright, so glide has been established. Let's get to the next part of the checklist. Next part of the checklist is landing site select. Well, there's the airfield. Lucky for us it was so close. Third part of the checklist is ELP type. Well, we have two types of ELPs that we could do. For this, I'm deciding to do the spiral ELP. And the reason for it is it's the most conservative way to lose altitude while still being in range of the airfield. Ugh, stupid replay cameras. Anyway, so that's basically why we're doing the spiral ELP. I could do the guesswork of having to do a straight in, figure out how much altitude I need to lose and go far out a certain amount of miles, and then turn in for a single shot approach to do the recovery. Well, that's a little bit risky, and I don't want to do the guesswork trying to figure that out. Straight-in approaches are really more for aircraft that are more beat up than myself. If you can see, my plane is largely undamaged, aside from the fact that the engine is dead. But I still have plenty of roll authority. My ailerons and elevators and everything work just fine. So instead, we're going to set up for this ELP. Now, how would you fly a spiral? That's a good question. And it also depends on the altitude, which we'll get to in a minute. An ELP, or spiral ELP, sorry, is flown in, well, if you can guess, a spiral over the airfield. Now, the first part of the spiral is going to be flying pretty much directly over the airfield, about as much as you can guess. As you can see here, I pretty much only had my HUD to fly off of and the map, so I kind of use the map as my reference. Now, in terms of the spiral, I decided I'm going to do right-hand spirals over the airfield, which will put me about half mile or so off of my right wing to put a little bit of separation between myself and the airfield so I can maneuver and basically just do oval patterns over the field until I have the altitude I need to meet for a landing. Now, let's get back to the altitude problem. Now, when we had this in failure during the engagement, we were really high. In fact, we were about 2,000 feet or so. We're running to about 7,000 feet right about now. So I pretty much talked a lot and we lost a lot of altitude at this point. So we're still managing our glide, we're over the airfield, and everything's hunky-dory. So what we're going to do now is figure out what altitude we need to be at to make the recovery a success. Now, my buddy got to the airfield and landed before I did. And he told me that the airfield elevation was 975 feet. MSL, so mean sea level. Perfect. This is exactly what we need to figure out how we're going to make this approach work. Now, if you saw from my other videos where I talked about the spiral ELP as well as the straight in, you notice that there's different keys. High key, low key, and base key. High key is the highest point in which you're going to do the spiral approach, and it's at a set altitude that's over 1/3 point down the runway to do your approach. So let's see, map that out. We're actually past the runway at this point, but yeah, if you were to approach from the direction I was coming in, it'd be about 1/3 the point down the runway from the beginning of the runway. Now, high key is 2,000 feet above ground level of the field, which means high key needs to be 3,000 feet. I rounded the field elevation to 1,000 for easy pilot math. So high key, we need to approach over that 1/3 point at 3,000 feet on our altimeter. Low key is going to be 2,000 feet, which means I have to lose 1,000 feet between high key and low key to make this approach work. It will then turn into base key, which is more or less your final approach key, which is when you're going to decide to deploy your gear and flaps to make the approach. Now, as you can see here, we're about 4,000 feet right now, and we're coming down the downwind side of the airfield. So now we're getting ready to approach high key. Now high key, we need to hit that 1/3 point down the runway at 3,000 feet. So now we're going to talk about that. As you can see, we're doing our turn in, lining up with the runway, and you can see that kind of like runway threshold, the very beginning part of the runway that's closest to us. That's the point where we want to aim after the gear is deployed. Alright, so we should be about 3,000 feet and 1/3 down the runway right about now. So now we've reached high key. We're losing our altitude the way we need to, which is perfect, and now we need to start thinking about our turn toward low key, which is going to be on this side of the airfield on the right hand side. So we're turning, still got the runway in sight, everything's looking good. Now it's going to put us off to that half mile or so separation, so we can come turn in for our base key. And looky here, we met our target of 2,000 feet AGL. Now we are at low key. So now we need to get ready to turn in and do our approach to landing. So base key is about 800 feet AGL, which we just passed. So now we're turning on in, and this is when we're going to decide on deploying our gear and our flaps for the best approach. So there's the airfield, everything's looking good, landing looks like it's assured. So now we're going to deploy our gear and flaps and get ready for our approach. Perfect, everything looks good. Now I'm a little bit fast as I come on in here, bounce a little bit, but I got more than enough runway to play with here. And now we've made our approach. Successful landing for damaged aircraft. Now if we look back at the altimeter, the field elevation is, well, yeah, about 1,000 feet, which is perfect for what we needed for our pilot math. Congratulations, we just landed this beast down on the runway for repairs. Now we can get back in the fight. Now, some of you guys might be questioning, why is this useful? Is it practical in a game? Like I said, this was really exaggerated. I had a lot of altitude to lose, and so I could have done any number of ways to kill altitude, like going after another aircraft, kind of like I did, kill it, and then go home, which is what my friend did. Totally practical, but I'm sure he used something a lot like this when he finally decided, with the altitude he had left, to figure out how he was going to come in for landing. So it's still very practical, and it's even better for you at longer ranges when you're trying to, say, leave from one edge of the map to the other to come in for a landing, and you need to figure out how much altitude you need to be at and when to make the approach work. Well, back in the fight, and off we go. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the comments below, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And this is Beaker12 signing off.